welcome back again, everybody, and welcome to our final session for the day. I hope you've all enjoyed these sessions and been able to learn a lot. Also wanted to point out that all of these sessions will be available to watch through the Whova app for the next 3 months. So that'll give you opportunities to catch up on any sessions that you might have missed part of, or rewatch any sessions that you want to try to absorb more of. I know that's something that I'll be doing for sure. You can also look in the agenda section of the Whova app to see titles and descriptions of the 6 superb breakout sessions that we have scheduled for tomorrow. The breakouts are the one part of this conference that were pre-recorded earlier today rather than broadcast live. So I can say with confidence, having listened to all of them, that they are absolutely superb. And I know you'll want to hear as many of those as you can. We've already heard from 4 of the 6 breakout presenters in these past 2 panel discussions that we had. But in addition to those 4, we have 2 additional presentations that will be offered as well. One is by Gerald Richer, an economist at Goshen College, who will be speaking on where planet and people come before profit, sharing his experiences working with indigenous people in the Ecuadorian rainforest. A fascinating talk. And also from Gail Hefner, who will be speaking on loving our downstream neighbor, environmental racism, and the call for environmental justice. We've had some great discussions here today about justice and environmental issues, and Gail's talk does a great job of pointing out how racism is connected with environmental issues too. So that's a wonderful discussion as well. And so to introduce our final main session for today, I'll hand it off again to BioLogos President Deb Harsma.
What a great day this has been. I too am going to be re-listening to some sessions. The panel discussion we just had about finding hope between indifference and despair. So many wise words there of where we can look for our hope and how to actively take small steps of hope to be working in community, and how these are things that are what God calls us to. The Bible doesn't promise that everything's going to be rosy, but we are still going to take these active steps of hope because we are looking to the better future that God has in store for us. And before that, we got to hear Kyle Van Houten, and it's great to hear. We heard original research that he is doing, those maps of the climate change, the impact, where the locations on Earth that are going to feel the worst impacts of climate change relative to the locations on Earth that are producing the most greenhouse gases. It's incredibly illuminating and a great discussion starter if you want to be using that and talking with people about climate. So really enjoyed the session so far. We are learning what it means to do earth keeping, which Stephen Baumer-Prediger challenged us to earlier. And now we come for our final plenary. We heard in the first one God's Word, the second one from God's World, and now we're going to bring them together to see how faith and science can work hand in hand to bring a better world for flourishing for both humans and other creatures at the same time. I got to meet Milmer Martinez Vergara just last week for dinner and enjoyed meeting him. I was out in California, where he is the Regional Partnerships Manager for Plant with Purpose. He spends a lot of time in Latin America as their regional director there. And the mission of Plant with Purpose, I love this threefold mission: economic empowerment for the poor, environmental restoration, and spiritual renewal. Why are those things so often in different buckets? In God's vision of shalom, those things all go together. And so I love that we're going to hear his stories. Milmer is trained in marine biology. He does the genetics of dolphins and has studied that with dolphin populations around the world. And he is now partnering with Latin American communities to reverse deforestation and address rural poverty. So welcome, Milmer.
Thank you, Deb. So, good evening. It's very, very odd for me to be in this type of forum. I'm usually just sitting down and having tea, even if it's with 20 people, but it's a little different when I'm in front of everyone and just have it be the focal point of the discussion. So I apologize if I feel a little awkward, but it is really awkward for me. So anyway, I was very pleased while having lunch today to see that, to hear fellow scientists talk about things that I never felt comfortable talking around other scientists. So I really, that helped calm my nerves. And so I appreciate everyone for their kind discussions at lunch. I learned a lot. Anyway, today I'll be talking about our invisible community or our invisible communities, and yeah, we'll see where that takes us. I will be reaching down a little bit on my phone to keep track. I tend to ramble, so I'll be looking at my phone. So I apologize for that. So here's this thing. There you go. So my goal in today's talk is to tell you that you are a part of a community that you might not know that is there, and that you might think that is invisible. And I mean a part of a community in every sense of the word, as a member, as a food web node, as an influential species, and as a neighbor. Let me tell you a little bit about how I became aware of this. Since as long as I can remember, I never lacked empathy. I could live vicariously a friend's vacation to Switzerland or the Caribbean and enjoy it the same. I could enjoy a stranger's good fortune too. But in the same way, it was difficult to see someone else's in pain and to see tragedy and suffering. It was very difficult for me. So what especially living in Colombia or growing up in Colombia during the 80s and the 90s, there was a lot of that happening. So for me, I avoided the news. As soon as I could hear the music of the news coming on, I would just disappear from the room. So I took refuge in God and the outdoors, and I spent a significant amount of time at church and as an acolyte at school and in the family countryside farm. And during this time, I learned a couple of things. I felt selfish to be running away from the pain that someone else's pain was causing me. I realized that empathy provided me with an opportunity to love others and to be more thoughtful and to better respond to the call to love the neighbors, to love our neighbors. So instead, I used that repurposed empathy and engaged in meaningful, vulnerable conversations with people. And the idea was to get a better understanding of why and figure out what I could do if I could just support them, or if more appropriate to the community development realm, if I could collaborate with them to be able to mitigate the source of the suffering. The first time I started having these dialogues was with actually the caretakers of our farm, and it was they were coca farmers, not by choice, and they had been displaced from the southeast of Colombia, north of the Amazon, due to the military conflict. They were, as I said, they were not coca farmers by choice, and I quote, "It was the only crop that didn't rot at the side of the road." I gained some understanding through their lives of the rural reality of Colombia and a lot of the rural reality of Latin America. A few years later, while getting my biology degree, I was taking a marine ecology class, and I learned what an ecological community was. And I became aware of how each member of the community was connected directly or indirectly with living, non-living components of the ecosystem, of their community. So it didn't take long for me to see people, to see local fishermen as part of a reef community. I realized that the issues that affected the human communities could affect the function of those relationships within that community. So poverty could manifest as a dysfunctional relationship between people and their other elements of the community. So when we look at the biggest threats of any ecological community or any ecosystem or even planetary ecosystems, the same three actors always show up: pollution, habitat destruction, and overexploitation. As I dove deeper into studying behavioral and molecular ecology and conservation genetics, It only reinforced our connectedness to our ecological communities. And especially considering that a significant proportion of the biodiversity concentrates and overlap with a significant proportion of human rural populations in conditions of poverty, it only made sense to think about this from a system perspective. So I didn't separate one from the other. The issues from one would affect the issues from the other. These realizations took my career into development, where I am at the moment working at Plant with Purpose, doing the work that I'm doing, and doing it the way how I'm doing it. And the idea is to accelerate, to try to replicate and accelerate that process that I went through of awareness, so that and through a guided dialogue, so that I could, one, my team and me become aware they become aware of the problems that each community is facing, as well as my role in the system, as my role in the collaboration, and as well as their role in the collaboration. So the idea, so let me just tell you a little bit about three examples. I want to tell you three stories of three different people in three different countries, just to tell you how they became aware that they belong to an invisible community, and that catalyzed a change in behavior and awareness and their community. So the first story takes us to Haiti, and it's the story of Madame Ketty and Moses. Moses is the one with the blue cap. And here we find ourselves in the southeast of Haiti, and close to the border with Dominican Republic. We're in that picture. We're in one of the last remaining pine forests of all Haiti, of endemic pine. There's not even broadleaf trees left in that forest. And here we are in a natural national park. So it's an area that by law is reserved to be a nature reserve. But people from the communities have plots there, and they use the land. So here we see the trees in the back, that they are still there because it's a ravine 50 meters high. And the area where we're sitting in the picture is an area where people cultivate onion, carrot, potato, and it's a high input agricultural production. They do this because that's how they live. This is what they do to feed their families. This is what they do to survive. Now, what I didn't tell you, what didn't see in the picture, is that back there in those ravines are the nesting habitat of an endangered bird that is called the black-capped petrel. So here on the right, you see the distribution for that black-capped petrel in blue, in the shaded blue. And what we did through this, so we were already working in the area, but by becoming aware of the existence of this bird that I wasn't aware of, suddenly we had to adjust, we had to have these conversations and sit down with the community, with our teams, with the government, and with other organizations to see what we can do about it. What we end up realizing was that the solution was a simple refinement to what we were already doing. It was a matter of choosing where and how. I remember that at the beginning, our team was saying people don't want to do it, but they hadn't even really talked about it. So when we sat down to have this conversation, when we sat down to empathize with people and to see what their issues were, and so that they could understand ours, and so that we could identify a role, we came with a proposal to make a transition of crops from a monoculture, high-intensive, high-input, into something that was more aligned to the environment, to the ecological needs. So that was agroforestry. So here on the right, we see Madame Ketty with her nursery, and she has a nursery with fruit trees because they're tree crops, and in the corner we don't see them. She's trying also to do pines. She does this very, very like hiding, because it's frowned upon for you to be planting pines. Because if you plant pines, it's like you're telling the government that land is not yours. So that became, so Madame Ketty and Moises, my team and the local team, became aware of how the black cat petrel was part of their ecological community, and we mobilized and tweaked our intervention to be able to have a conservation product. We look forward to seeing the next surveys. Due to the political instability, we haven't been able to visit, but we look forward to see if our efforts in the area have made a difference. The second story takes us to Colombia. So let's go to Colombia, in the northern part of South America, and the story is with Mateo. And Mateo lives in a post-conflict area only 3 hours away from Bogota. And Mateo was an ex-guerrilla, an ex-combatant. And he has a community and relates to people that were reinserted after they went to jail, after they were put to the special jurisdiction of peace, and they came back to the community. They came back to the community to be, of course, stigmatized, as you would expect, because of what they had done. So they live in a municipality that goes from 2,500 meters over sea level to 600 meters over sea level, and they live in the upper part of that watershed. So that upper part of the watershed is the picture on the right, and the top right is how it looks right now. That is basically how people have cut the trees in the forest over the years to make a grazing plot. In Colombia, people say, I'm going to improve the land by cutting the trees and putting cattle. That's the part of the culture. So Mateo and his team of people live cultivating coffee in areas surrounding that area. That is a very, very important ecologically area because it's an area that collects water. You can see the ridge on the back. That ridge is about 150 meters tall, and the water just collects. Just standing in the area, you can feel the sponge under your feet. So it's a very, very important area, about 5,000 hectares of land that has been mostly deforested and that need attention in order to sustainability of water availability for the whole municipality. In the right is just north of that area, within the same altitudinal habitat, is how the forest should look like. Sorry. So when I approached the group, the idea, I just wanted to know what was happening in the area. What could we do? How could we be part of the process? They were in a situation where I said they were already stigmatized by the population, and of course it's normal. I mean, victims with people that made the victims living together, that's basically. But that was part of that process of peace and reconciliation. So we are right now in a post-conflict environment, but they've had trouble to build community. They've had trouble to integrate in the community. So I went there with the government to be part of the efforts to be part of those efforts. What we realized during these conversations was that they never had the expectation to be forgiven. They thought that what they did was bad, and they have no expectation from people to be forgiven. However, what they want is to let them be part of their community, to let them play a role and let them play their part. Through these conversations and these watershed awareness, because we had different people from different perspectives, they became aware that they were basically sitting in one of the most important habitats for water availability for the whole municipality. So they mobilized, they became aware of this, and as an act of peace building, they decided to mobilize themselves, mobilize everyone in the area, and start the reforestation of these environments with native species. Of course, a lot of these lands are owned by people that don't want to let them go, so it takes a lot of negotiation. So that's something that they've really engaged on to make part of it, to facilitate that process. So they became aware of their watershed community, they became aware of their responsibility, and now their decision will have an impact at the level of peace building. The story continues, but I don't have a lot of time. Anyway, the third story is with Paul in the Dominican Republic. So Paul had a monoculture of cilantro in his land, and cilantro uses a lot of pesticides, a lot of work, and it doesn't really produce a lot of income. So he was in conditions of poverty. When we arrived to the community, he lives in the upper watershed of Osama in the Dominican Republic that provides about 40% of the water that the capital city uses. So this area provides an incredible ecosystem service for the city. So by working with us, by collaborating with us, he decided to prove migrating, transitioning his monoculture crop into an agroforestry system, multi-species, multi-level, that would play well with the local habitat. This is an aerial picture of part of his land. So in the upper right is the cilantro or coriander monoculture, and also in the lower left. And all the area in between, except for that mature forest with colors, it's his land. So he decided to transition and try it out in part of his land. And what he noticed is that only after 3 years he could get a significant crops from 8 different species. So after that, part of the efforts, part of these collaborations that we've had and these conversations that we have with other institutions locally, we decided to implement a basic biodiversity assessment with the community. So instead of just as a way to evaluate our impact in the ecosystem via biodiversity indexes. So what we end up doing, something very basic, but we ended up working with the population, with the farmers. So we made a group of people, farmers, local schools, the local high school, the local primary school, the local an Adventist university, some representatives of the government, and some students of biology and chemistry. And we basically did a big party, 60 people, and we took 3 days to do these assessments. So we designed a transect, and we looked at vascular plants and bird species. So the result of this was not just an index of how things were changing for the positives in the areas that we were working, including Paul's farm, but also it catalyzed an environment where people were talking to each other, where the scholar in Santo Domingo was listening to the farmer in that area, and they were just learning from each other. As I said, very often we tend to see humans as the problem. But in this case, the idea, what our whole approach is seeing people as a solution, as a very influential species within that ecological community. So that was an effort. And the important part of this is that Paulo became aware of how many species in his plot, how many bird species were actually present, as well as plants that before he used to call weeds. And then he said, you know what? I want my piece of land to be a piece of Eden. I want it to contain much more than my species. So this has molded a lot of his approach and his identity vis-a-vis the plot. Something else, he became aware of that ecological community. He became aware of how his land was nested within the other land. His land nested within the whole watershed. Just to give you a sense of scale, this is a map of that upper watershed. It's about 240 square kilometers, and each little square, this is a model of the number of families who are working now in that area, and the points represent the scale of the size of their farms. So if you think about people working at this scale, at the detail that I mentioned before, with the mindset that I'm talking about, this has potential to transform a whole ecosystem. So these examples show behavioral changes that brought benefit and value to people themselves and the ecosystem without any compromise. It was a simple action of tweaking, talking, and negotiating. They were triggered by an awareness of how they belong to that invisible community, to their ecosystem community, to their ecological community, to their purpose community. They became aware who was part of that. How were they connected to each other? As a Christian, or as Christians, we have a call to love our neighbor, to care for creation. It seems always very aspirational, very grand. But through these processes of increased awareness, we become aware of these links and the repercussions that they have downstream, the way how we're connected directly or indirectly to the things that we do, to the other people, to the other elements of the system. As I mentioned before, Moises considered the petrel as part of his community. He's like, oh, he's my friend. So though I say it in an informal way, this changes you. This mindset really sits inside you. So every time we become aware of these connections and these links, we actually have an opportunity to love others and creation by simple everyday actions, even if they're miles away from where we are and we cannot see them from where we're sitting from. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciated that discussion and time to hear a little bit more some of the stories that you've talked about there. I was struck by just hearing those stories, how it seems like to so many people we hear as if there's a choice between helping other people or caring for the creation. But in each of those stories, it seemed like it would have been impossible to draw a dividing line between doing those two things. Is that a way of pushing back against that with people, with telling stories? Or do you ever encounter times where there does seem to be a tension between helping others and helping the land?
I mean, in development, there's something that we call the Readiness Assessment. And it's basically that we shouldn't work with anyone that doesn't want. So at the beginning, when I learned about this methodology, it seemed very passive. It seemed very, well, they don't want to work with us. Okay, right? So for me, before giving up on that conversation, I like to have that conversation, right? So yes, I've encountered times in which people, yeah, it's difficult, and I understand. I have no expectation of them to tweak their ways into getting an ecological product. I mean, time is something that it just works for you. So when you take a little time to wait, things kind of figure themselves out. But for us, it's definitely an approach that we take to heart. If we have a clear understanding that our livelihood as humans, our livelihood as rural farmers, direct users of biodiversity, depend intimately to the health of the ecosystem, it only makes sense to take that as part of the system, to take that as part of the solution, and to not give up right away.
I'm struck by, it seems like in the United States especially, it seems at least materially possible for people to simply deny that many environmental problems and challenges exist. And I know you're based in the United States now, but you spend a lot of time traveling in other very different countries. Is that a big difference in just the privilege or ability to not think about environmental issues?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the cities cities and development gives us a buffer, right? We use a buffer into the way how those things influence us or affect us directly. But when your chicken doesn't come from a styrofoam tray, and you actually have to go and raise it and feed it and take care of it, then when you don't have chicken, it becomes a big issue. So I think that we are several steps removed here from that reality. And so the key here is to make those connections, to sit down, to empathize with people, and to see how you're connected to that person. How can you be part of their community so that you understand how it goes? But it's difficult. I think it's simply part of human nature to not see long term. It is counterintuitive to how we do things. I mean, one of the things that we do is we do saving groups. And I tell people, it's not that we are implementers of savings and loan groups. I'm a believer of saving groups. And one of the things that is very much aligned to the work that we do is that the saving mindset is a mindset that makes you realize that little by little you achieve a lot. So that element of patience. So it's very much aligned to the fact that you say, you know what, I'm going to change this monoculture club of corn, and I'm going to try trees that are better for the land and for the soil, but it's going to take 3 years for me to give a fruit. So it's like saving. It's like I'm going to put water. So it's very much aligned to that process. So this is very, very much aligned to what you need in this type of development.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you said that really struck me is that by becoming aware and caring for these communities, our love can extend far, far out from those we immediately interact with. And I think that struck me because we've heard these presentations and discussions about how negative impacts of our poor environmental care have problematic impacts far beyond even places where humans have ever gone. And so I think it's encouraging to see a flip side of that, by better caring for God's creation, we can extend love to people that we don't even know or haven't even met yet.
Absolutely.
Too. So.
Absolutely. It's like the aunt that has never seen you and she sends you gifts every Christmas. It's like she loves you and you don't even know why. So I think that the opportunity that we have here is to love others and to not separate that love for creation from the other, and to just be mindful about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it is difficult, so my hope is a conversation.
Yeah.
My hope is a dialogue where I can make you feel what I feel, and where I try as much as possible to feel what you feel.
Yeah.
But not divide who I am from who you are, when we are both part of the same creation, we're both humans, and we're basically in the same planet together.
Yeah. Well, and thinking about having those conversations too, I'm sure you've had a lot of times on airplanes with someone next to you asking what you do for work, and your work is so closely integrating those two halves of caring for people and caring for the planet. I'm curious how those conversations with strangers go for you. Do people tend to pigeonhole this as either being development work for people or environmental work, or how do they respond to seeing you kind of hold both those together?
It depends on the airline.
Okay.
if you're in an airline that is traveling within the States, it's like, yes, there's a challenge, right? It's like people are challenged. But if you're taking an airline for example, in Africa or in Latin America, people don't. There's no dualism. There's no dichotomy between the spiritual world and the natural world, politics. It's all one big thing. So people it's more innate for people to understand that way. There's less of that categorization. There's less of that boxing in order for us to understand, to optimize, and to scale. Right? There's less of that mindset.
Okay.
But yes, I've had my approach is just I want to get to know you. I want to get to know to understand where you live. I just love people, and
Plant with Purpose is based in California in the U.S., and one of the questions that came in was about talking to Americans. What effective ways have you and your organization found to help Americans feel the importance of restoring biodiversity in other countries and ecosystems that don't tangibly affect them directly?
Well, I feel like these are questions for the rep teams, but I can tell you what I've done, and for me, I mean, for example, you mentioned dolphins, and immediately people feel something, right? Right? I mean, you mention a panda, and immediately you feel something. So I think that trying to find ways to connect to the other person, and usually charismatic animals can do this. So and again, and also the other thing is that I never have the expectation. So I think that manipulation is easily noticeable. So my objective is not set from the beginning. My objective is to talk to someone, and if they want to know, I'll tell you. And if I see an opportunity to present another perspective, I'll take it, but I'll find a way to connect them to something that people can relate to.
Yeah. And I find it fascinating that you have a scientific degree as well. You've done scientific research. I'm curious if there are ways that you can see your work now as still carrying on your scientific work in some way? How do you apply that science that you learned to what you do?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, just the fact that I am a firm believer of scientific method, and if we are saying that we're restoring the ecosystem, right? I give, for example, that graph with the model, the map with the model, I had to show it. I mean, that's a very scientifically way to show the scale at which we have influence. It's not just like, 3 families, and no, it is. We're talking about 2,000 families basically doing this stuff. at a scale that is significant. So just from the perspective of monitoring and evaluation, we use it. We are very stringent. It took me, maybe I shouldn't say this because the boss is listening, but it took me years before to donate until I got to believe that we were saying that what we say we were doing. Really, and I was part of that effort. How do you make sure that the change that you're saying, that you're putting on your collateral, it is what you're saying? I mean, there's a lot of not that happening, right? I've seen it. So I think that's a good application of scientific method. One thing that I take that it might be a little counterintuitive from science is that the extent of your conjecture is limited to your sample size. You cannot generalize. So I feel that it requires humility. So the humility is something that is very, I think is very spiritual, but I think is also very scientific.
Yeah.
The fact that you have to understand that you have to be responsible with the words that you use. You cannot make those assumptions without stating them, right? So I think that's another application of science. So I feel that they're one of the same, and I'm still working and collaborating with people on science, in research and in doing papers and things like that. So yes, I think it just complements and makes me stronger. The same way how work in development, it just makes us stronger and more relevant.
Yeah. I like the point about humility there. I mean, I think you talked a lot about awareness in your talk, and you can't grow your awareness, I guess, without realizing that there are things that you don't know, and that seems to be another a virtue that should drive scientists as well too. Is that I think I was told once that if you really want to start a good conversation with a scientist, don't ask them what they know about. Ask them what they don't know and what they want to find out, and then you'll really get them fired up and going.
Yeah. I made a point, I hope it was clear, I made a point that when we facilitate these conversations, this dialogue, our groups ourselves, and myself, is to become aware of what role I can play in this collaboration. It's not like, I facilitate your awareness so that no, not at all. We are there to figure things out. I have no idea. So I think that this is something that we exercise in the work that we do. We're there to be of service. For example, one of the things that I like about the work that we do is that very often people talk about empowerment, and that's great. And you think about community development, most of the definitions are about how you solve your own problems. What about who solves the problems for those people that cannot even solve their own problems? So when we talk about the work that we do, we're doing empowerment. We're facilitating those empowerment processes and using empowerment methodologies. But the spiritual component of this gives people the freedom and the agency to service, to help other people. That for me is two steps up of empowerment. The fact that you recognize someone else's problems as your own, and you mobilize your money and you mobilize yourself to help them. And we have a lot of this. And some of the spiritual indicators that we use in monitoring and evaluation is how many times you helped your neighbor. So it's very much ingrained to what we do, and I think is a direct reflection and manifestation of that spirituality, of God's love.
Yeah. One of the questions came in, you mentioned someone who saw the endangered species as a friend and a member of the community.
Yeah.
And this person was wondering, what are some other ways that mindsets in these communities differ from our Western and North American mindsets on creation care and the environment?
I think I mentioned that a little bit before, but again, they don't separate spirituality from things, right? It's all in the same. So the fact that you see that you give a persona to an animal is just like, yeah, it's normal. I mean, all you have to do is read Garcia Marquez, and you see all those things all over. And so that I think that's something. I think that people, I don't know, and I like what a farmer said one time, also in the Dominican Republic, also using this system. He would tell us that when he migrated to agroforestry, to this type of agroforestry, very diverse, he starts listening to the birds, and he said, I never felt alone again. So you see, it's very easy for us in Latin America to to make this part of our daily life and not be awkward about it, not be weird about it. It's not like you're going to go and have coffee with them, but it's just, but you see it as part of your community.
Yeah. Huh. Well, I'll close with a final question, the same thing I've asked the other speakers too. Is there one particular spot in nature or activity in nature that you've returned to that you most directly feel God's presence and majesty in creation?
The water. I mean,
Okay.
just the water. I mean, I live by the water in San Diego, so, but any chance I can be in the water and I can slow down and look at what's happening underwater, I feel a part of that. So so I feel that. I feel cared for.
Wonderful. Beautiful. Thank you so much,
No,
Milmer.
thank you.
It's great hearing from you and having this conversation. We're almost done our event for today before we move on to the breakout sessions tomorrow afternoon. But for a few closing words before we go, I'll hand things back to BioLogos President Deb Harzma.
Thank you so much, Milmer, for your talk, for sharing those stories and sharing your passion for community and for this humble spirit of service, of really listening first and seeking how we can help. I love how each of those stories you told can bring together this flourishing for both humans and the creation. And that is a vision we've been driving towards all day here in what we've been talking about. And this truly is possible, and I'm so glad we could hear those stories. We've explored God's word, we've explored God's world, and we've seen how faith and science can work hand in hand. Science shows us these important truths about God's creation, about how life and ecosystems are interconnected, about how our behavior has consequences for good or for ill, the power that we have to change the world around us, the changes that have already happened. Science informs us of those, and it gives us choices that we can then make. But everybody needs something more than just those scientific facts. How are we then going to respond? What are our priorities? What are the ethics that we're going to use? Whether you're a Christian or not, you're going to be making some choices about what matters here and what is the way forward. So science alone is not enough. For Christians, it is our faith that shows us how to bring these together. It shows us our right understanding of the human role in creation. We've talked a lot about that today, how we are image bearers, how we are earth keepers. We're here to serve and protect. We are responsible. And that human role in creation is critical. So that what Christians can bring to this conversation is this right understanding of the value of human beings and the value of the created order, all under the lordship of Christ. And it is our faith that gives us that listening spirit that Milmer exemplified so well and that we've heard throughout today. That ability to listen, when Rahel Wells is talking about the challenge of talking with somebody you disagree with, and the patience and spiritual discipline it takes to try to find that connection, even when it's really irritating and frustrating, to see this other person as someone who God loves and that I love, and how can I understand them? It is our faith that allows us to do that, the work of the Holy Spirit in us. And it is our faith that moves us to compassion and care, to give us that motivation to act. We're imitating Christ. There are so many times in this creation care conversation where we have to give up something. We have to give up something that we like, the ways that we live our daily lives, the plastics that we use all the time. My little thing recently was to switch from using the single-use plastic for my lunch to using a reusable container. And now I'm in the habit of it. It's no big deal. But it took, for years I used the little plastic bag for my sandwich. And the kind of spiritual discipline, what's the motivation to do that? Because nobody's grading me on this, nobody cares. But it's to do that right thing. And if you think of what Christ did, service to others, self-sacrificial service to others. We're not here to, we have freedom in Christ, but that freedom is to serve others, to give of ourselves. And it is our faith that then motivates us to that kind of service and sacrifice. Yes, and it is our faith that gives us hope. That hope to keep going, to keep doing what is right. We have this perspective, I love what somebody said, we have this long baseline of that we have with our faith, of seeing all the way back to God's intention for humans from the very beginning. What was God's vision for what we should be? Our faith gives us that grounding. We're not looking back to 20 years ago or the 1950s or 200 years ago. We're looking back, what was God's vision originally for the creation? And where is God taking us in the end? There's a restoration of Eden, of having the river and the trees there at the end of Revelation, but there's also the city, and there's humans living with creation, and there is God coming to dwell among them. And that long baseline, this huge, big story of what God is doing, gives us this incredible context that we can bring to this conversation of creation care, and that motivates us to become part of that story. We are taking action to be part of this big work that God is doing. So it has been a wonderful day. I'm so grateful to each of our speakers for the incredible richness they brought to our conversation together. And thank you for everyone who has listened, who's stuck with us on your screen the whole day. And if you had to take breaks, if you haven't been able to catch everything, you can come back to listen to more. And I hope you tune in tomorrow to hear more of our excellent breakout sessions as well. So many thanks to everyone, and may God continue to walk with us as we walk with him. Thank you very much.